Welcome to episode 9 of Black is Evil and White is Good. It's another perspective with I, the mystic philosopher. And yes, my melanin people, it's high time for reasoning. Here in this episode 9, I will continue to show and explain how, from my perspective, the Caucasian race and its system of force, also known as the legal system, has practiced and is practicing the art and the science of self-preservation by mimicking the laws of nature and thereby preserving themselves, preserving their existence, preserving their system of power, dominance and control, mimicking the laws of nature, thereby preserving their false, deceptive and diabolic ideologies and philosophies of white supremacy by containing, controlling, and terminating, you name them, all that which, whether true or false, they believe, think, and perceive is black. I will also continue to share my perspectives on the direct and indirect relationships between the system's police killings, police brutality, police harassment, police intimidation of my people of African ancestry. We, the Earth's organic and highly enriched melanin humans. We, the Earth's natural native earthly humans of high melaninated, of high carbon skin complexion, and the word, sign, and symbol black. In other words, I will continue to show that as long as we melaninated people continue to accept and allow Caucasians and their legal system and all others to continue calling, naming, labeling, carding, profiling, listing and blacklisting us with their sign, with their symbol, and above all with their mark of death, black. We are and we will be considered and seen by them as nothing but, and at best, nuisance to be contained, or savages. Will be continued to be seen by them as demons and monsters to be eliminated. It broke my heart quite recently when one of my young brothers told me with tears in his eyes that he wished that he would appear invisible to the cops, for only then he knew for sure that he would stand a better chance of survival, because he realized that the moment the cops see him, all that they see is black. All that they see is a black man. And by now we all should know what the word black means. For your information, here are just a few clear, practical, and documented examples that can best illustrate this point, that the will and the testament of Caucasian and their Caucasian system is summed up in the one compound word, self-preservation, and that it will act and that it will do anything and everything that might be necessary for its survival. The now former Ferguson Caucasian police officer, Darren Wilson, the killer, if not the cold-blooded murderer of one of our unarmed, highly enriched melanin carbon-skinned teenager. In his published testimony before his grand jury, he described his victim, the young Michael Brown, as looking like a demon. Now please note that another word, also known as synonym, in his Darren Wilson's Caucasian English language for demon is the word black. A demon, and thus a black man, is also defined as a very cruel or fierce person. So when he saw and confronted young Michael Brown, he did not saw a human or even a humankind like himself. But what he saw was the opposite of himself. He saw a person that was black, and therefore a demon. He saw a very cruel or a fierce person. He described himself as feeling like, and I quote, like a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan, unquote. During his confrontation with his victim. He described his victim as being intensely aggressive. Quote, and then after he did that, he looked up at me and had the most intense, aggressive face. The only way I can describe it, it looks like a demon. That's how angry he looked, unquote. He described himself as feeling threatened and felt fear for his life, etc. Now please note that all the adjectives and adjectival phrases that he used to describe his encounter with his victim, the young, unarmed teenager Michael Brown, are summed up in one English word, one of his own Caucasian word. And the word is black. And from my perspective, because of his predisposition, because of his inherited genetic race memory, and his otherwise programming and inculcation, and in accordance with his Caucasian society's erroneous and false designation of him being white, of him being a white man, of him being a white police officer, he perceives all earthly organic human of highly enriched melanin, highly enriched carbon skin as black. And thus, consciously or unconsciously, knowingly or unknowingly, in his psyche, the moment he saw his victim, the young Michael Brown, he saw a threat. He saw danger. He sensed danger. His sensor triggered his fight or flight, kill or be killed mechanism, etc., which according to the first law of nature, threats, also known as black, must be eradicated or it must be contained. Now, please let me draw your attention to a few more recent events of the same nature by borrowing a few quotes from the CBC News World website. Headline: Protest erupts, or protest erupt after former St. Louis police officer acquitted of killing black man. Quote: People march downtown after the acquittal in the murder trial of Jason Stockley, a former St. Louis police officer charged with the 2011 shooting of Anthony Lamar Simit, who was black, in St. Louis. The author is Whitney Curtis of Writers, unquote. Now, please let me dissect, analyze, and comment on this piece of newspaper report, or this online report from this site a moment. And I will begin by asking the question. 1. According to the reporter, who did the now former St. Louis police officer, Jason Stockley, allegedly murdered, but is guilty of shooting to death or guilty of killing? And the answer is Anthony Lamar Simit. The second question is, according to the reporter, who was Anthony Lamar Simit? And the answer is black. In other words, Anthony Lamar Simit, according to this article, was a black man. 3. Or the third question is this: according to what you may have learned thus far, who is a black man? Now please remember, as mentioned above, that another word, also known as a synonym for the word black, in his meaning in the now former St. Louis police officer Jason Stockley's Caucasian English language, is demon. That's another word for black. Therefore, one does not have to be a genius to figure out that a black man is a demon. Or if you prefer, a black man is a demon man. Thus, a black man, by just one definition, is a very cruel man, or a very fierce man. The fourth question is this: if Anthony Lamar Simit was truly a black man, was truly a demon, was truly a very cruel and fierce man, or a very cruel and fierce person, etc., etc., then why were the people protesting his killing, if not his cold-blooded murder? Who in their right mind would not want a black man, a demon, a cruel and fierce man, or a cruel and fierce person to be eliminated from their community? From my perspective, the fact is that the people were not protesting the death, the killing, the murder, the elimination of a black man. Far be it. But they, my people, were protesting the slaughtering of one of our fellow human, one of our fellow brother, a fellow natural native earthly human, a fellow Earth's highly melaninated or organic human, who the Caucasians' legal system, the Caucasian police force, and the Caucasians' multimedia falsely, deceptively, contemptuously, and diabolically named, called, labeled, listed, profiled, and publicized as black. A black man. Stockley, quote again from the article, Stockley, who was charged with first-degree murder in the 2011 shooting had insisted he saw the 24-year-old Smith holding a gun and felt he was in imminent danger. Prosecutors said the officer planted a gun in Smith's car after the shooting. Unquote. From all that we have learned thus far, and from reading this article, who did the killer if not the cold-blooded murderer Stockley saw? From my perspective, the then officer, police officer Stockley, saw black. He saw a black man. And whether or not he, Anthony Lamar Smith, had a gun, or whether or not the killer planted the gun, is completely irrelevant. Or it bears very little relevance to the fact that what he saw was black. And I have mentioned repeatedly in a previous podcast and blog post that from my perspective, the evidence will show, and that the evidence has shown, that most Caucasian people, and in particular Caucasian police officers, are not afraid of guns. But what they are afraid of, or what they claim to be afraid of, is all that they think, believe, and perceive in their mind as black. Quote, in an interview with the St. Louis Post-Dispatcher, Dispatch, right? Stockley said he understands how video of the shooting looks bad, but that he did nothing wrong. Unquote. Let me quote again. I can feel for and I understand what the family is going through. And I know everyone wants someone to blame, but I'm just not that guy. I'm just not the guy, he said, unquote. From my perspective, if he did nothing wrong, then he must have done something right by the system in order for him to be set free by his Caucasian judge and Caucasian legal system. And what he did right was to eliminate a black man from his Caucasian society, also falsely and deceptively called his white society. Here's another quote. From the same article. The case was among several in recent years in which a white officer killed a black suspect, including in the nearby suburb of Ferguson, Missouri, or Mississippi, where Michael Brown, an unarmed black 18-year-old, was killed by a white police officer in 2014. That officer never was charged and eventually resigned, unquote. From the same article, I'll quote again. Officers also have been acquitted in recent shooting trials in Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin, unquote. Now, why are all these Caucasian police officers and others of the system's agents of force all across North America and the world over, I might add, are being acquitted of brutalizing, shooting, maiming, sodomizing, murdering, and killing our melanin people, our African people? Some of you might ask. It is because, and as mentioned before, they are programmed to see us all as black. Programmed to see us all as black people. As people, worthless people. As people a valueless people, as a people that is good for nothing, a good for nothing people, a up to no good people, as bad people, as evil people, etc., etc., etc. And thus, their instinct for survival activates. Their self-preservation fuse ignites, and they fires. And we all are left the helpless and oftentimes the defenseless victims of their real evil. And here again, please let me repeat that from the mystic philosopher's perspective, and the evidence will show and will also show that it is not the gun or the guns or any other weapons that an African American, or more correctly, that a highly melaninated man or woman, boy or girl, may or may not have in his or her possession, that police officers, and primarily that Caucasian police officers, are afraid of or is terrified of. Not at all. But what they are afraid of, or what they are both consciously or subconsciously afraid of and terrified of, is black. It is like the saying, when a bull sees red, or a bull is seeing red. They are afraid and terrified of anyone and every one of us humans of African ancestry that they rightly or wrongly perceived to be black, that they believe is black, or to them appear as black. Because basic observation and natural earthly human intellectual honesty, coupled with an activated common sense, will affirm that if police officers were afraid of or terrified of guns, or any other weapons for that matter, and as some, including the system's multimedia, would want us to believe, then they themselves would not be in possession of some of, if not all of, the most deadly and most lethal guns and the most deadly and most lethal weapons capable of mass destruction known to human and humankind. And for the record, it does not really matter whether the police officer or police officers are of African ancestry or of any other ethnicity, because they, police officers, all attend the same Caucasian system forces academies, and training schools and training institutions. They all receive the same Caucasian systems force training, education, and certification. They all have the same Caucasian systems force honor bestowed and conferred on them. They are all empowered with the same Caucasian system's power and authority to enforce the same Caucasian system's laws. They are all trained to have the same one mindset and to be of one mind. They all belong to the same one Caucasian system forces fraternity. They all honor, serve, and protect the same one Caucasian system's religions, gods, lords, and masters, etc. They all carry out the same orders. And when dealing with us, their own melanin people, their own fellow Africans, some of them, if not most of them, their behavior and obnoxious attitude are oftentimes far worse than some of their Caucasian partners and colleagues. And why, you may ask? Well, from my perspective, it is because they too are educated, or more correctly, they too are trained to be part of and the protector of the Caucasoid systems, brother and sisterhood. And regrettably, sometimes they totally forget or seems not to care from whence they came or to where they truly belong. In fact, sometimes they even appear to be ashamed to be from among us, melanin people, and people of African ancestry. And logic, coupled with our basic activated common sense, should tell us and affirm that the will and testament of the Caucasoid system is self-preservation. Therefore, all of us, its students, subjects, servants, and slaves are trained, educated to serve and to protect the system, to serve and to protect their masters. Self-preservation. It is self-preservation, and it is for the continuation of their reign over us. In fact, some of them are African brothers and sisters, having received the Caucasoid system's education, training, approval, anointing, etc., and the title and honor of becoming a systems professional, have become so Caucasian, systematized, mentally and intellectually warped, especially as it pertains to the first law of nature, also known as self-preservation, that they would not even date or marry into their own African race in order to preserve their seeds and honor their own or our African ancestors. Another point that I think is worth mentioning again is the fact that it is not the gun or the guns or any weapon, other weapon or weapons that the African American, or that correctly, or more correctly, that a highly melaninated man or woman, boy or girl, may or may not have in his or her possession that most, if not all, Caucasian are afraid of and terrified of. But what they are afraid of, or what they are both consciously or unconsciously afraid of and terrified of, is black. All that which is black, and all that they perceive as black. Because if that was true, then they, meaning Caucasians, would not be the inventors, the creators, the manufacturers, the investors, the distributors, the sellers, the possessors, the owners, the profiteers, etc., 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 of some of, if not all of the most lethal and deadly guns and weapons that they own.